listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe. I am your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project. Joining us today is my lovely partner, Leah Shaper.
Hello.
And welcome to the show, whether it be morning, evening, afternoon. Today we're going to continue the discussion of the most recent cosmic catastrophe in memory, and this is the Younger Dryas event occurring approximately 12,900 years ago. There was a major event that has been witnessed worldwide. There are tons of mythological accounts from native tribes. I might even mention one in a moment here that actually witnessed the event. And when we look at the scientific data, what we see is a drop down in the temperature. And in the last decade and a half, numerous peer-reviewed papers have come out basically, in my opinion, proving the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Now, what I mean by that is that something definitely hit the Earth. Maybe many items hit the Earth at this time, but there could have been other things going on, like volcanic eruptions, solar outbursts. These are not exclusive to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And would you concur with that, Leah?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we got that under control. Let's go. Go ahead.
No, I was just chuckling.
All right. So, and more specifically, in past episodes, we have implicated the Taurid complex as potentially being the main reason for all this hectic activity, including the Alaskan mucks, the flash frozen mammoths and bison. And this just didn't happen in the Younger Dryas. It began happening tens of thousands of years prior, perhaps 40,000 years even earlier. And this conclusion that we're talking about the Taurid complex is because when you study the Taurid complex, it appears to be the debris of a larger cometary body that you can date back around 50,000 years. And currently, the Taurid complex contains 19 of the brightest near-Earth objects. So,
oh, wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that means the complex itself has the largest pieces still remaining within any meteor shower.
Yeah.
And that's bad news because over a period of hundreds, even thousands of years, we go through different portions of this meteor stream, and it's almost like potluck. It's like there's a million or a billion chances of where we can go through the stream, and maybe on certain times of the year or during the great year, more specifically, the Taurid stream is more deadly.
Well, if you ask, I mean, we're going to talk about this later, but this paper we're going to talk about, that's Sweatman and Sitkritsis, I cannot say this last name. This is a paper from 2017. One of the things they talk about is the concept of coherent catastrophism. So the basic idea is you had what was the original giant comet Enki that broke apart, and that it takes, tens of thousands of years for the breaking apart to sort of get back to like a background level. But in the meantime, Earth's orbit intersects the orbit of this stream of debris approximately 4 times every 6,000 years. So we go through these periods of time where we're much more likely to run into some of the debris from the Taurid meteor stream, which is what is left of Comet Enki.
Now, let's not get confused about the god Enki, E-N-K-I.
Right.
This is not even related. Enki
and it's
is
spelled
spelled
differently.
E-N-C-K-E, and is in fact the last name of the person that determined the orbit. Usually comets are named after the person that discovers them, but this is one of the rare cases where Enki was the person who discovered the periodicity of the comet, and therefore got the name. Now, if it comes through 4 times every 6,000 years, that is a periodicity of catastrophe in the order of 1,500 years, every 1,500 years.
Yeah, I don't know if it's an even 1,500 years. I mean, it's marked by, I guess, the perihelion of the debris stream. So it may not be.
I can tell you 500 AD was a hellhole. It was the Dark Ages. It was the end of the Roman Empire. It was at the beginning of the Justinian plague. And many people think that it was because of objects hitting the earth triggering these hellacious events.
Right.
So there is that, which again, we're alluding to if you've been watching the show from the rip. Now 8, 10 episodes, I don't know. It is becoming ever apparent that cosmic catastrophe happens more often on Earth than mainstream science leads on to, or that anyone, even in historical accounts, would actually say. But based on all the literature and all the peer-reviewed science we've been looking at, the chance of a civilization-ending event is very high at any moment.
Yeah, and in fact, Sweatman and Citrixis, that's so hard to say. According to them, we're in a period of coherent catastrophism right now, in the sense that we should be entering that debris field now. And I don't know if that's incorrect or if we just really haven't seen that. It just hasn't really, just haven't been hit with a large enough bolide yet. Well, but with all the suggestion is that it's coming.
With all the conspiracy theories out there, with the idea of deep underground military bases and missing money, the powers that be very well may know something is happening. Now, the evidence for the impact is overwhelming. The onset of the Younger Dryas cooling in 12,009 was marked by intense wildfires across North America, recently corroborated happening across Siberia as well. And these are not necessarily associated with black mats. Black mats is more of a biological sedimentary process that happens in times when it is very moist. So if you do, in fact, have plant material and it's very moist, you can develop a black mat. But many of the black mats also contain charcoals. So many of the black mats are associated with forests that also burned. Now, what that says is that there was a lot of water vapor that occurred at this time to make it wet for a short period of time during the event. So the wetness was only during the event. And the reason I say that is because for the 1,500 or 1,400 years called the Younger Dryas event, it was very dry. And that doesn't even relate to Dryas. That's a different word. But it was extremely dry. There was almost no snow and ice accumulation. When you rapidly drop temperature into an ice age, things kind of come to a standstill. Most people know if it's really cold, it doesn't snow. You need to be in a certain window to get rain and snow. And if it gets extremely cold on the earth and everything freezes, it's almost like things just come to a halt. What you do get is an increase in wind and dust because it's so dry and the rain stops. You get all these dust storms. And it must, it probably blocks out the sun for the most part. We all have seen like a haboob. So this is a terrible time. And we know things are hitting the earth or something is happening from space because there's tons of peer-reviewed literature that show dozens, if not hundreds of sites that contain nanodiamonds. And nanodiamonds just don't regularly fall from the sky. There's also impact markers like microspherules and magnetic grains found in high concentrations, including in the flash-frozen cranium of bison and mammoth found up in those Alaskan mucks.
Are you saying in their heads?
Yeah, that's how the only ones they sample. They get the skull out and then they look at sediment that went inside of the head because they assume that was in place at the time of their death.
Right.
Or the burial. And then they use that, they look inside the sediment, inside the skull as a pristine sampling of the emplacement event. And then they date those.
Right.
Okay. So any other comments?
Not at the moment.
All right, let's share the screen and we'll get on to some other topics here. There's a great website you should all go to. It's the cometresearchgroup.org. And it is a group of scientists that have all gotten together since the Firestone paper where once there were dozens of scientists that were all angry at Firestone in 2007 when he proposed this hypothesis. In the interim, the majority of the scientists that were against the idea are now on board. And it's because of the overwhelming evidence that we just discussed. If you want to follow them, you can come over to the Comet Research Group and their website. You can become a member. You can donate to the work. And they have links to all of the events that they attend and all the papers that they're writing on this topic. Were you aware of this, Leah?
I was not, and that's a very cool resource.
Yeah. So
also, it says quite a lot about, given all of the pushback to Firestone, it's kind of remarkable that, not only did they come to agreement, but have come together in such a fashion.
Now, there is still argument if it was a comet or many comets or asteroids, or if now a lot of the scientists in the Comet Research Group and outside the group are postulating that there were some solar outbursts. Now, this is not exclusive of cometary debris moving around the inner solar system. And what I mean by that, it's because we witness sun-diving comets often. They almost daily fall into the sun. But more in a shorter term, monthly or annually, a larger sun-diving comet will fall into the sun, and it will produce a coronal mass ejection when it hits. And so there's something definitely going on, an interaction. Maybe the interaction is the CME comes out and meets the comet when it gets too close, kind of like a static discharge, which we've seen on Earth, the Chelyabinsk, Tunguska. These are all types of comets or asteroids that entered at a very steep angle at very high speeds and never made it to the surface. They explode above the surface in a static-like discharge, in a plasma burst. Typically, these are hundreds, if not thousands of times bigger than any nuclear explosion that have ever occurred on Earth. So that's mind-blowing alone.
Yeah.
Now, what the Comet Research Group does is it really breaks it down for the layman to understand how significant this event was 12,800 years ago. And they just picked the top 3 bullet points. There was a sudden drop in temperatures, 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and it stayed that way for 1,400 years. The extinction of megafauna. So tens of millions of large animals went extinct within a short period of time in many areas. Not everywhere, but it seems like the mastodon and the large animals in North America, they all went extinct while they made it in other areas. So the event was more severe on certain continents relative to others. And we're going to get to that at the end of the show, because it is, in fact, Anatolia that is on the edge of the largest effects of the Younger Dryas impact field. And in fact, the rebirth of humanity in the Fertile Crescent, where these people regrouped. And in doing so, their number one priority was to warn humanity of what just occurred.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we'll get to that in a moment. But in North America, in the archaeological record, we've gone over the sudden change in the Clovis culture, instantly disappearing and becoming Folsom, which they claim is like a different race of people, but is what it is. It's the survivors of Clovis. And we're going to see the same phenomenon happening in Anatolia, that in a period of time change their technology to meet the needs at the time.
Fascinating.
Okay, so yeah, that's pretty cool stuff, isn't it?
Indeed.
So there is a paper, Paleolithic Extinctions in the Taurid Complex, that covers all of this. So we're going to leave you links below this in the video. And I'm pulling up a graph here of the extent of the Younger Dryas impact field. And it basically covers all of Canada, all of North America, all of Central America, portions of South America, and it extends all the way through all of Ice Age Europe, up into Scandinavia, and down to the tip of Africa. Now, we've also covered a paper in the Atacama Desert in southern Chile, which is 1,000 miles south of the impact field, that suggested at the same time there were impacts above that desert in Atacama at the same time. So this is not the full extent of where these impacts occurred. They seem to be widespread, extremely numerous, witnessed by everyone, and then it affected the entire world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe the thing with the coherent catastrophism idea, in terms of where we are at now, maybe the fact that we haven't been hit by a stream of bolides recently is just speaking to the fact that over time, the debris field will become less and less dangerous, let's say. It'll be in smaller and smaller pieces. Although I don't know if enough time has passed for that to happen. I mean, I guess you could argue that it's been roughly 12,000 years, so maybe that is enough time.
Yeah, and we do have evidence of the flood of Noah, Berkel crater, and some other large impactors around 6,000 years ago.
Right.
So it might be that the 1,500-year interval is lesser, and that it's only on the major flexure points, the 6,000 or the 12,000 year, which is the cross in the Iron Cross of the Great Year.
Yeah.
Maybe those are the worst times, which is bad news for us because we are on the major, we're at the 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock mark right now.
Yeah.
All right, so what I'm showing here is a really nice graph of the temperature for the last 20,000 years. You can clearly see for the last 11,000 years or so in the Holocene warm, it's been quite nice on Earth. There have been exceptions. There are small blips in climate every few thousand years that end the empire, and we get sent into a dark age. Many of these are associated with plasma outbursts from the sun, which we've covered in previous podcasts. The 8.2 cold event occurred right after the largest solar outburst that we know of, which may have been thousands of times more energetic than the Carrington event, an X100 to an X1000. And then after the event, it gets cold on Earth for hundreds or if not 1,000 years.
Once again, I'm always struck by comparison in terms of the temperature dips. So look at that dip for the 8.2 cold event versus the dip for the Younger Dryas. So if the 8.2 cold event was caused by a solar outburst larger than anything we know, then what the heck happened at the Younger Dryas?
Exactly. What happened? And I think what's happening is...
and again, at the end of the bowling alley rod.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here is that Taurid complex, because the bowling Alarod begins 14,700 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so something happens at that moment. We have a spike in radiocarbon excess at the same time. Is it around 17 or is it at 18?
I don't remember the number. I want to say it's 17.
It's right in that time frame.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that something is happening in the inner solar system. Either there is a supernova from a nearby star, which would be our star, and it's not a supernova. You don't need a supernova. You need a SEP, a solar you need an electron storm. You need a massive solar outburst in the form of, let's say, 10 coronal mass ejections all above X50. You're going to get that radiocarbon excess. You could also get it if a large cometary body moved into the inner solar system, and on its first flyby, you went through the tail, the ion tail or the debris tail. And that brings up a really interesting point here. Consider this account from the Ojibwa, a Native American people that are now focused mainly on the Canadian border. The star with the long, wide tail is going to destroy the world someday when it comes low again. That's the comet called Long-Tailed Heavenly Climbing Star. It came down here once, thousands of years ago, just like the sun. It had radiation and burning heat in its tail. The comet burned everything to the ground. There wasn't a thing left. Indian people were here before that happened, living on the earth, but things were wrong. A lot of people had abandoned the spiritual path. The Holy Spirit warned then a long time before the comet came. The medicine men told everyone to prepare. Things were wrong with nature on Earth. Then that comet went through here. It had a long, wide tail, and it burned up everything. It flew so low that the tail scorched the Earth. The comet made the different world. After that, survival was hard work. the weather was much colder than before. Wow.
That is amazing. What an extraordinary account. And, you know, it's just hilarious to think about the fact that typically we would just, not we, I don't mean you and I, but we as a society would shrug this off as just like some fairy tale mythology.
Well,
no, they're describing actual things that happened.
Wow. Knowing what we know, this is the event at 12:09.
Yeah.
This is the drop down in temperature to the Younger Dryas. The weather was colder than before. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
I
was also struck by, it says in the account that things were wrong with nature before this impact.
Yeah.
Like, what's that about? That's very interesting. Like the whole concept of we're being punished in some way is in there.
It is,
which is interesting.
but we can explain it with the models and the proxy data, because forever, for 80,000 years, we were in the Ice Age, and then the Bowling-Allerod warming happened. The temperature went up 20 degrees. That would have mixed up all of nature. Trees would be going extinct. Things would be moving. If you were a society that had lived in the Ice Age world and it got warm and everything's melting and you're like, what in God's... Animals are migrating in your area you've never seen before. New birds are coming in. So you're going to think that God is punishing the earth.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's going to be very unstable and changing all the time.
And then for about 1,000 years, it's unstable, and then the Younger Dryas event happens. I mean,
oh my God.
So you have about 1,500 years of evolving during this Bowling-Allerod warming that is mixing up the entire world. Your worldview is being mixed up because things are happening that are unexplainable, that have never happened before. What's happening is if you were in zone 4, now you're in zone 15.
Yeah.
And you could have palm trees. It's completely baffling. And within 1,500 years, if you were in the right area, you would go from temperate to tropical, and it would make no sense. There would be porpoises and strange fish, and the seawater would be warm. So it would be very confusing.
And it would make it even harder to survive, right? Because you can't predict things the way you used to. If you know that I need to go to this spot on the river to catch salmon, and now suddenly you can't, and there's some other fish there. So now you have to constantly change and adapt to all of that.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about that same thing happened in Anatolia. These people during the Bowling-Allerod warming and the Younger Dryas event were living there, and it was very sparse. It's not a place you can even farm. It was terrible. And then it got, after the Younger Dryas event in 11.5, it changed and it got amazing. So anyone that made it through that period of catastrophe and then were in that spot where they had to be hunter-gatherers because there was no water or rain, or it got amazing. It became the Fertile Crescent. That water erosion in Egypt that made Robert Schoch famous, that is the change to a new temperate climate in this region, which allowed them to farm and prosper during Gobekli Tepe times. Now, prior to that, we're talking a few thousand years before Gobekli Tepe, we're talking about what this Ojibwa tribe is talking about. Everyone burned up, everything burned up. And that is what the Comet Research Group is working so hard to pinpoint what, in fact, did happen on this fateful day or series of days 12,900 years ago on Earth.
We really should be thanking our ancestors for doing whatever they could do to live through all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're in the second half, we're going to talk about the paper. But before we get to that, we're talking about advanced cultures. Prior to the Younger Dryas event, there's evidence of Upper Paleolithic proto-writing as well as art. In at least 400 European caves, such as Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, there are Homo sapiens that drew and painted and engraved amazing works of art that are as old as 42,000 years ago. And that includes sculptures like the Lion Man carving. And so not only are these beautiful works of art, but they have astronomical and astrological significance.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have cultures that I've been watching the skies for tens of thousands of years prior to Gobekli Tepe. It's not like Gobekli Tepe is some kind of miraculous discovery. People knew about the heavens, they knew about archaeoastronomy, and they were also hiding in caves.
Yeah. Yeah, and all of that sort of helps make a little bit more sense of why we have this narrative about, just being hunter-gatherers, post-Younger Dryas and everything, because clearly we were advanced. We knew a lot of things. We knew a lot about archaeoastronomy. But then all of this catastrophe happened, and we had to go back to square one.
Yeah, and the paintings begin when some of the first impacts occur 42,000 years ago. Get to the break.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine.
There is blood on the wire.
Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
There have been imaginative science fiction writers for generations.
Be evasive.
But that doesn't mean that they're telling the truth as opposed to fiction.
I'm aware of some archaeologists that have uncovered large bones indicating giants in Virginia. Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, indicating that there were giants before the Nephilim.
And sons of God, plural. They weren't talking about Jesus coming down and
No, that's right. Yeah.
I'm Steve Crawford. Join me every Thursday night in Studio A at 6 p.m. Eastern for Factor Theory Live. Find us on www.revolution.radio. Great guests and great stories. What do you believe?
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you.
You got to kind of wait for the bumper to end, or you can't really hear the voice.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so when we left you guys, we were talking about the hunter-gatherers that are painting in these caves all over Europe 40,000 years ago, leading up to the Younger Dryas event. And then after the Younger Dryas event, hunter-gatherers gaining steam, and then humanity explodes, 6,000 years ago. But with the discovery of Gobekli Tepe, I believe we have the missing link. It is clear that these are advanced artisans, however long it took them to get their skill back, advanced scientists and advanced spiritual people that were worshiping in this way that brought the entire universe together into their perspective. And I want to throw this out here, that because, let's quick share the screen up here. You're going to just look at some of the art that are in these caves that are tens of thousands of years old.
It's so, aside from everything else, the art is just so beautiful. It really makes my heart flutter when I look at an image like this and I think about people doing this so many thousands of years ago.
Yeah, no, so if the earth begins getting impacted at the time of these paintings 40,000 years ago, it's my supposition that what we're seeing here are survivors that are trying to make their mark because things have gone bad on Earth. And it begins during the times of the first impacts, 40,000 years ago, when we find some of the earliest flash frozen mammoths with, buttercups in their stomachs. So this event goes on all the way up until the end game, the Younger Dryas event. Any advanced civilization would have been slowly destroyed by catastrophe after catastrophe. And then the end game, the Younger Dryas, when this massive swarm of Taurid bolides come in, they hit the ice sheet. The ice sheet shatters into millions of bolides, which hit America. And then there's other objects hitting, and things are lighting on fire, and tsunamis we've covered are sloshing back and forth in the Atlantic, and everyone dies in 24 hours except a handful of humanity in North America, in Europe, just a handful that witnessed it.
The idea that the humans that survived would not mark, these events in some way to record their history and warn future generations is completely absurd, right? Like, it only makes sense to find these artifacts on Earth that suggest that they're marking these events.
Exactly. And so the oldest petroglyphs that we see dating 11, 12,000 years ago are plasma petroglyphs. So clearly something is happening with plasma, maybe from our sun, maybe from our magnetic field, and impacts on Earth. Now, we're going to jump into the paper on Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe, but before we get there, what we want you to understand is that the people in Anatolia that made Gobekli Tepe didn't just show up. They didn't get dropped off from an alien ship and create Gobekli Tepe and hundreds of other similar circles on that hill. There is evidence that this area was occupied from before the Bowling Alarad warming. And one of the most unknown sites is Tel Caramel, which has continuous occupation from 17,000 years ago throughout the entire Gobekli Tepe time. Here we can see the dating. Carbon-14 goes back 17,000 to about 9,000 years ago. That's the entire span of the Bowling Alarad, the Younger Dryas event, the catastrophe, and then the rewarming. So the people in Anatolia were there the whole time, and they weren't meager. We'll link you to all these papers. So the people living in the Fertile Crescent here, we have a map up, had been there for the entire Ice Age, 16,000 years ago till recent. And they were certainly no hunter-gatherer schleps. There is stoneware. These people were carving bowls out of solid rock. Take a look at some of these artifacts, date 12,000 years old.
Wow.
Even though they weren't making pottery, they didn't need to make pottery. They knew how to carve stone, for goodness sake. Look at this. Look at these. These are single solid pieces of stone that are carved. Now, the archaeologists may have it wrong. Maybe they had some advanced pottery that made it appear to be stone.
Either way, I mean, look at the detail on the side of those pots.
It looks
like,
exactly
what were the
like
tools
an
that they were
Anasazi
using?
pot. Don't these look Anasazi?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, they don't have the typical black and white painting, but yeah.
The bottom center one does.
I can't tell if that's carving or paint, but.
Well, it's carved into solid stone.
Yeah.
Here are some solid stone pendants with bas-relief effigies.
Wow.
And they have dots on them, so I'm thinking these are constellations.
They might be.
Yeah.
Especially when we consider Gobekli Tepe, but we'll get to that.
These are the people that built Gobekli Tepe. They were not like stupid hunter-gatherers. I don't think anyone on Earth, maybe a 1,000% could create this right now.
Right.
And then carving these bowls and things out of stone.
And how is this stuff explained by the traditional narrative, right? I mean, we talk about the Fertile Crescent being the birthplace of civilization, but do they just ignore all of this?
Yeah, this is like 11,000-year-old jewelry. And more stone, more jewelry, and more stone bowls and cups. So the people in Anatolia were highly skilled artisans. And what happened was, well, we've been talking about it for 10 weeks. The whole earth burned and everyone was washed away. And so they had to recover, and it took them a while to recover. And in fact, it took them most of the Younger Dryas cooling until they were skilled enough in Anatolia to begin building things like Gobekli Tepe. Some of the first structures, let me see if I can pull up some pictures here. Here are just simple circular stone buildings. These are the first things being built after the 12-9 event. So when you're getting your last few people together, you're not going to build the Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
It's going to take time, and it took about 1,400 years to go from this construction to this construction. But you can see the lower stone walls are the same construction as the earlier stone walls.
Yes. Yeah.
The only difference is that these pillars, which are gigantic, and now serve a purpose, are being built about 1,000 years after the entire world dies. So it took a 1,000 years to get to this. And the reason that they needed to build this, and we saw from the pendants how skilled they are at bas-relief and carving stone, that this is very easy to do. They just make a bigger pendant.
Yeah.
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 And then that leads us to the work of Andrew Collins and Rodney Hale and the Gobekli Tepe Pillar 43 astronomical interpretation.
Yes.
Now, does the Sweatman paper reference the work of Collins here?
No, and in fact, I looked at this paper yesterday, and they kind of give Sweatman a hard time in this to some degree, but they don't reference this. Is this earlier than the Sweatman paper? I thought it was after.
Well, there wasn't a date, so that's why I asked.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, I believe it's after because they're criticizing Sweatman to some degree here.
They're criticizing Sweatman, but at the same time, they come up with the same conclusion that this is warning about the 12-9 event.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're just nitpicking?
Well, I don't remember exactly what the criticisms were at this moment, but, you know, sometimes, well, can I get into Pillar 43 here, and then I can talk about how it's criticized on occasion?
Yeah.
Okay, so will you go back to those pictures of Pillar 43, or just pull up a picture of Pillar 43 somewhere that's pretty clear? There's one in this paper that has like a hand drawing that helps because it's very clear. It's figure 2.
With the hand drawing is figure 2?
Yeah.
I'm already on figure 5 and I haven't
Yeah.
passed it.
I think you must have passed it and just didn't see it, unless I'm recalling a different paper or something.
Yep, there is none there.
Oh, okay. I guess I'm thinking of a different. Oh, I'm sorry. This was from the other paper that yeah, this paper. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so so first they kind of say, okay, look at the scorpion in the lower half and say, okay, this kind of puts us generally in the vicinity of Scorpio, the constellation Scorpio. And then if you start looking a little bit more, the what they're calling the vulture above, that thing. So they say that this, especially with the angle of these wings, that this vulture head essentially corresponds to the teapot portion of the Sagittarius constellation. And then they start looking around. So they're in the general arena. They start looking around, and then they go over, and to the right of the vulture on the upper portion, they describe like a bent bird, like a crane with a downward wriggling snake or fish. And to them, this looks like this corresponds with Ophiuchus, which is, if you're not familiar, is what some people call the 13th zodiac sign. That's debatable. And then below that, you've got that other bird figure, which actually I think they admit they don't really know what to think about that one. And then at the bottom, the very bottom, you have what looks to be like a goose or a duck floating, and to them it looks like that corresponds to Libra. And then to the left of it, you can't see all of it because it hasn't been completely uncovered. You've got a dog with like its head is kind of sticking out, and then the feet, right? And that would correspond to the constellation Lupus. Now, okay, so one of the criticisms here is...
What about the dude on the bottom with his head cut off?
Well, they talk about that too, and their interpretation of that is that it is a headless man, indicating that like this horrible thing happened on Earth and lots of people died. That particular interpretation doesn't jive for me so well. It just sort of feels like a fill in the blank because we don't know what to say about it.
And here we can see the Pillar 43 overlaid on the constellations.
Right. And they also acknowledge that, okay, those figures, they're in, pretty good relative location to each other. It's not perfect. Like Ophiuchus should be a little higher, but they say, okay, they were probably constrained by the shape of the pillar. Now, people will criticize this on the basis of, okay, takes this Scorpio rendering. Well, how is it that those people at that time happened to see a similar figure in the sky when they looked at those stars? And I think that's a very legitimate criticism, right? Because this is like looking at clouds and interpreting clouds to look like bears or dogs or whatever. It's very, very subjective. But they don't recognize all of these constellations or asterisms, as they're sometimes called, as we do today. Like the vulture with the angled wings, and those angles do correspond very well to the teapot, by the way. It's only a portion of what we call Sagittarius, and Ophiuchus we don't recognize as a crane or a bird. So I think it's still quite possible. I mean, they do a statistical analysis on this and basically say, like, look, the likelihood of all of these things being carved next to each other in this way, indicating certain places in the sky, that it's very, very, very likely, according to their statistical analysis, that this is a good interpretation.
And what they did was they reversed the archaeoastronomy 12,000 years to see what it would look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So they did that. And the really important part of this is the ball above the vulture wing. Because assuming that is the sun, and it is the sun in Sagittarius, there's only 4 dates that kind of make any sense where the sun is in Sagittarius at the solstice or equinox, at sunset or sunrise, right? This is how we determine what the zodiacal epochs are. And those dates are 2000 AD at the winter solstice, 4350 BC at the autumnal equinox, 10,950 BC at the summer solstice, and 18,000 BC at the spring equinox. And so they go through those dates, based on other dating at Gobekli Tepe. The only one of those dates that makes any sense is 10,950 BC at the summer solstice. And then they go even further, because at the top of the pillar, you've got what some people will call handbags. You could interpret those as a sunset or a sunrise. And you'll notice that next to each one of them is a little figure. And if you look at those figures, how are they interpreted? It's a little hard for me to. So you've got all the way to the right, you have like this downward crawling figure, and they're kind of saying that looks like a frog. And then in the middle, you have what looks to be like a charging ibex. And then all the way to the left, you have another bending bird. And if you go through again those figures and how they would correspond to asterisms, it turns out that at the spring equinox in 10,950 BC, at the spring equinox, the sun would have been in Virgo, which they say would correspond to that asterism. And then similarly, 10,950 BC at the winter solstice, it would be in Gemini, and you get that standing quadruped, which, you know, could be a ibex or a goat or something. And then at 10,951 BC at the autumnal equinox, you get Pisces, which corresponds to this bending bird. So basically what they're saying is that those handbags at the top, or the sunsets, are, you know, further indication of exactly when this was. You know, these are the other places where the sun was in this time frame. So that's pretty fascinating. What do you think?
I mean, it's a lot to swallow. I didn't read the paper, and listening to what you said, it's a lot to swallow, but I didn't do the analysis on the constellations. Now, what is interesting is that we really don't know where the names from these constellations come from. In antiquity, we go back as far as we can go, and they exist. It's like, who's naming these?
Yeah.
And clearly, because of the cave paintings and their associations in some areas with constellations and the representation of Pleiades, tens of thousands of years ago, these people were studying the cosmos. And even the native cultures here, the fascination with things like lunar standstill and some of the devices, the Minoan eclipse calculator uses the same mathematics as Stonehenge uses to predict eclipses. And the Minoan stone calculator is not only 4,000 years old, but if we use it today, it will predict eclipses with 96% accuracy all the way forward for the next 2,000 years.
Yeah.
So where is this advanced knowledge of cosmology coming from?
I mean, it's crazy, especially because there's this catastrophe, and clearly there's many fewer people on Earth, but there has to be an element of knowledge and information based on observation being passed from generation to generation. Like, that has not been lost here. I mean, if you look back, for example, as you mentioned, like, to some of those ancient cave paintings, you see these representatives of Taurus the bull again and again and again and again. So we've been, as a civilization, you know, looking at the constellation of Taurus and saying that looks like a bull, and telling that to our children, and them telling it to their children again and again. So some of it is that, but it is all observational, I think, and just being passed from generation to generation, and somehow it hasn't gotten lost in these catastrophes.
Just like you alluded to in moments ago, it's almost like looking at clouds and interpreting them. If you are an advanced culture that really doesn't have written language, everything is spoken. And we know this from some ancient societies that still exist. They hand everything down verbally, including the Druids. So you didn't need to write stuff down because people remembered it. The only way, and I just put myself in their position, if I need to teach my children this advanced cosmology, I better be using simple things like there's Taurus the bull up there. It may not look like a bull because it doesn't. That's what gets me.
Right.
But they had to use this technique to pass it on from person to person in a very manageable and understandable way.
Yeah. But then, of course, this is the whole point of Gobekli Tepe, right? I mean, if this is correct, and this pillar is now dated to 10,950 BC, you know, we're telling people that something happened, and it happened at this time, and it was very important. And now we're carving it into stone, and we're also burying the complex to make sure it survives whatever the next catastrophe is. You know, so we've gone beyond just an oral telling and said, like, no, we actually literally need to carve this in stone. And maybe that's because of all of the people that were lost.
Yeah, but what's more mind-blowing is that this is Pillar 43. This is one page in their Encyclopedia Britannica, which is that hill. So every other pillar may be depicting an entire other narrative.
Well, let me throw something else at you. So they also examine, it's pillar 18. No, not 18. Sorry, it's pillar 2 in enclosure A and pillar 38 in enclosure D. And they find a similar thing where there are 3 animals depicted in sequence. Yeah, right here. In one of them, it's an auroch, which is an ancient cattle species, fox, and crane. And then the other one, it's aurochs, boar, crane. And if you cycle back the procession and account for some other elements that, I can't remember the software, Stellarium, that Stellarium doesn't account for, the conclusion that they come to, and I'm not going to go through all the details here, is that for the first one, the aurochs, fox, crane, it seems to correspond to Capricorn, the northern portion of Aquarius, and Pisces. And for the other one, aurochs, boar, crane, it seems to correspond with Capricorn and the southern Aquarius asterism and Pisces. So, I mean, it seems that they're doing this again and again, and that's what all of these animals are about. And one other thing that they mentioned that is fascinating.
So these 2 pillars also both allude to 12,950 years ago.
Yes, absolutely, yes, because that's and so they wind back the clock to that time, and like, oh, but lo and behold, this corresponds pretty well.
Yeah, so to summarize, they suggest the carvings on these pillars represent the asterisms you went over.
Mm-hmm.
Pillar 43 is the date stamp for 10,950 BC, which is 12,950, which is the beginning, which is the Younger Dryas event.
Oh, I left out the most important part, is that, like, around this time, the northern and southern Taurids would be emanating from the Pisces region and following that constellation path. So that's the importance of these pillars. That's what they're noting, that here's where the North Taurids come from, here's where the South Taurids come from, which is also interesting because Gobekli Tepe is on a hilltop on the south side, which is where you would be looking at the sky for the Taurid meteor showers. So their whole theory is like, well, all of Gobekli Tepe is about monitoring comets and meteor streams, which, I mean, you have to really look at all of the pillars to really come to that conclusion fully. But just the evidence there is pretty interesting and compelling.
Yeah, and these are just if you're listening, Gobekli Tepe is only, here's the site. The excavation is barely 5% of the hill, and using LiDAR to determine there are hundreds of other stone circles. And these are all being built over a period of just around 1,500 years. So there's an amazing amount of work being done on this hill. And just based on what they've uncovered on a few of the stone enclosures, clearly has to do with advanced archaeoastronomy.
Yeah.
And the conclusion in the paper is that, well, it was being used to watch comets, of all things.
Well, and about that, I mean, something else that's interesting is that they note that all over Gobekli Tepe, you find animal remains of all kinds, including fish and just everything you can think of. All of these animals that are carved on the columns, you'll find the remains. The only thing you do not find the remains of are snakes. Which is interesting because snakes have often represented comets. And they do appear on the columns, Pillar 18 has a snake on it, and it seems to, well, it's hard to talk about this without getting into the details of Pillar 18, but that's pretty fascinating. Like, why is just the snake? Why are those the only remains that are not found there?
So there are lots of Gobekli Tepe snake motifs.
Yes.
There's a triple snake motif, and then look at all the snakes here coming around the entire side.
Yeah. So who knows? I mean, maybe these correspond to other comets that they knew about. Maybe it's all about the Taurid meteor stream. I don't know, but fascinating.
Yeah, maybe there were lots of snakes in the sky.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, check out our YouTube channels, Oppenheimer Ranch Project and Magnetic Reversal News, and we'll see you next week.
Here.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.